Now, a legal controversy is brewing in the US. That's after New Hampshire's Attorney General launched an investigation into a case where an immigrant was cleared of 6 counts of domestic violence by a local court. Augustin Bahati, a 33-year-old refugee from Congo, was arrested in August last year after he allegedly assaulted a pregnant woman several times. However, he was released the following month after his lawyer raised doubts on whether Bahati was legally fit to stand trial. In March this year, the suspect was cleared of all charges after a local prosecutor found Bahati to be culturally incompetent. Well, to discuss this case and its ramifications a bit further, let's talk to anti-war activist Daniel Shaw and Conservative writer Mike Cernovich. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me to talk about this. And if I can start with you then, Daniel. Well, New Hampshire's Attorney General, their office says there's no legal pretext for releasing a suspect on the grounds, as we heard them, so-called cultural incompetence. I mean, what's your take on why Mr. Bahati was allowed to go free?
Well, this is certainly a bizarre case. Nobody who's guilty of abusing their wife or any woman should be released. They should be met with the appropriate penalties. Wife beating and violence against women and all of its forms, sexual violence, emotional violence, and physical violence, is an epidemic across America. So certainly there should be no excuse for violence against women.
And Mike, I mean, what's your response to this? I mean, do you think by Mr. Bahati going free, this sets a precedent, and what are the ramifications?
Well, this is political correctness run amok. People are afraid now in America to say, you're in America, welcome to America, we have certain values, we have certain rules in place. If you say that, you might be xenophobic, right? So the city prosecutor didn't want to be seen as a xenophobe, and because of that, he decided to let somebody off on the cultural relativism defense. So this is the end result of political correctness and cultural Marxism and the social justice voyeurism run amok.
Well, what do you say to that then, Daniel? I mean, what do you think in terms of this as a legal precedent? I mean, cultural incompetence? I mean, is this the start of a whole new legal system?
Well, I think what Mike and I can really get down to debating is what is sparking so many refugees to be forced to leave their countries, whether it's the Congo or Syria or Iraq. And the U.S. and U.S. foreign policy is in the business of refugee creation. Actually, a study came out that by 2100, if things continue at this pace, there could be upward towards 2 billion refugees in the world, which would mean that there were actual more refugees than there were people in China or any of the other countries in the world. So I think what we should debate is U.S. foreign policy that continues to lead to the defuturization of millions and millions of people every day, causing one of the worst global crises since World War II.
And what's your response to that then, Mike? What do you think?
Well, there would be no debate. Yeah, there would be no debate with me because I'm opposed to the interventionism in the United States, the Hillary Clintons of the world, the people who want us to go in and bomb Syria and create more Syrian refugees, the people who want us to go to war with Iran, the people who want to create more war, the neocons and the globalist warmongers. So there would actually not be anything to debate there, because I think what a lot of people don't want to admit about Trump supporters is that many people like myself voted for Trump for one reason only, and that is because we oppose World War III. We oppose these interventionist wars. So Daniel is right. I'm happy to agree with him and admit that this refugee stuff going on in the world is due in large part to the neocon war machine, which includes liberals like Hillary Clinton. It includes the Democrat Party, of course, going over to these other countries and trying to institute regime change, which never works.
Well, let's also then look at the consequences of what's happened, which is why we have this particular case. If I can just, before you say anything, Daniel, I mean, Mr. Bahati's come over. He's a refugee, and then, according to looking through the story here, he had effectively classes that would teach him about being a US citizen. We can't really debate what's going to happen in terms of the refugee crisis, but we can look at the fallout here. Mr. Bahati was given these classes to train him to be, in effect, a US citizen, or to think about how to integrate in society. Therefore, isn't it on his own head, his own sense of responsibility to act in that way, to be law-abiding by the US laws? What do you think, Daniel?
Well, I think we'd all agree that, again, there's no excuse for the battering of any woman. So The problem with the U.S. jail system is that people acting out in violent ways are not rehabilitated. And no country in the history of humanity has ever had as many prisoners as the United States. So on any given day here in the U.S., the quote-unquote freest country in the world, you have some 8.5 million people who are locked up in prison. So there's a society that does not allow for people to heal and seek genuine rehabilitation. This individual, any individual who goes to Rikers Island or any prison in this country often comes out more criminalized, more battered, more beaten down themselves. So we seek genuine solutions of healing and rehabilitation.
And what do you think of that then, Mike? Do you think it's on the individual, or do you think it's on society?
Well, it's on both. The culture has to, and again, this is where the xenophobia kind of comes in. As we know, a lot of people in America like to talk about how apparently America is a terrible place for women and for the rest of the world, even though everybody wants to come here. But the truth is that the Western world treats women far better than any of these other countries. And when you allow people into your country who don't share your values, we as a culture and a civilization have to enforce those values. And that isn't being done because people are being afraid of, well, maybe they'll call me racist or xenophobic or some other ist and attack me unfairly and destroy my life and ruin my career, which is what a lot of people are trying to do rather than have adult conversations. So yes, it is on the individual, of course. The honor killings cannot come to America. Domestic battery cannot be normalized. Abusing women and genital mutilation of children cannot be allowed. That's an individual responsibility, sure. But as a culture, we have to send a message, and we can't be afraid to say that this is America, this is the West, and we don't do things the way a lot of other people do in the rest of the world.
Well, on that point then, Daniel, I mean, let's look at the timing of it.
But Mike, why do so many people want to come to America?
Carry on, Daniel.
That's my question for Mike. That's my question for Mike. Why do so many people come to America? It's not because America is the quote-unquote greatest place in the world. It's because people have been defuturized and they've been robbed of their opportunities, whether it's in the Dominican Republic or in Brazil or in the Middle East, because of U.S. foreign policy and U.S. interventionism, which, yes, occurred. You're 100% correct to call out the liberals and the neoliberals and the Clintons and the Obamas, but it would be deceptive to think that somehow Clinton or Bush or McCain or whatever conservative bigoted politician is somehow a friend of humanity. Look what Trump and the Saudis have done to Yemen, displacing millions of Yemenis. Look at the ongoing onslaught against Syria after Trump had promised that his foreign policy would be different with Syria and Russia. We're still on the brink of a potential World War III. His heightened aggression against the people of Cuba, Iran. So from Trump and the Democrats, two sides of the same coin and of the same system. I think that's where me and Mr. Cernovich firmly disagree.
And what do you say to that, Mike?
Well, I mean, we'll see. Well, there's definitely, I mean, I'm not going to defend American interventionism or American foreign policy. I never would. I was opposed to every major global conflict that we've had because all that it does is enriches the military-industrial complex. It enriches very evil people like Bill Kristol, very evil people in the American media. And we have no business going in and trying to oust Assad because we think that we can put in somebody who's a better guy. But then meanwhile, in America every day we have conspiracy theories about Russia meddling in our election, when meanwhile America, we're meddling in the rest of the world. So to that point, sure, there's no debate to be had. The interventionists in America, the so-called best and the brightest, the elite Ivy League educated people, are actually fools, and they believe that they can new colonialism. It's intellectual colonialism coming out of Harvard, Yale, and other Ivy League institutions, and it is absolutely a disgrace to humanity and the rest of the world. The flip side of that is we do have a mess. We should be trying to help these other countries, creating safe zones in other countries, but if you're going to come to America, there cannot be a cultural defense that, okay, it's okay to hit my wife in Nigeria or the Congo, therefore I can do it here. But he's afraid to. This happened in Rotherham, where there was a lot of children, 1,400 of them were being raped and sold into slavery. People didn't want to report it because they didn't want to become xenophobic. The shooting in San Bernardino, the neighbors had noticed that there was suspicious behavior, but they didn't want to call the police because they didn't want to be called racist. So we have to have an open conversation about what it means to have immigrants come from other countries and treating with them respect. But also, the other side of that is we can't just scream at people and call everybody racist because they're trying to impose Western values on people who maybe don't share them.
Well, in that note then, Daniel, what do you think? I mean, it's a delicate case. It's an immigrant refugee. It's an issue at a time of political turbulence in Washington. I mean, do you think there's any bias in the way Mr. Bahati's case was originally handled by the court in New Hampshire? Just something about the timing of the case?
Well, Mike's line on political correctness is certainly a curious one when Mexicans and Muslims and foreigners and immigrants to this country are harassed every day. There's a spate of hate crimes that have affected this country. So to think that there's some environment of embracing immigrants is ridiculous when hate crimes are on the rise, and just for being Mexican, you can be terrorized. And just for being LGBT, you can be harassed. So many cases occur every day. So I think we should focus on the reality on the ground of who's truly being harassed every day in this country.
What do you say to that, Mike?
Well, I mean, Trump supporters, yeah, I mean, I have a Persian wife and she's not harassed. We go out in public and people don't throw Coca-Cola on us or whatever because we're a so-called interracial couple. Nobody even sees that. A lot of these hate crimes do end up being hoaxes. The flip side, there's just a lot of hate in the world, and there's a lot of hate in humanity. If I walk down the street in certain neighborhoods in New York, as a white person, I would face racism from other cultures, and that's just the way it is. It's unfortunate. So it isn't just that hatred is limited to one group of people, one race, one religion. People in general are just very nasty to each other. That isn't a good thing. But America, we're far more tolerant than the rest of the world. I've traveled all over the world. I've visited other countries. And we're very welcoming of newcomers relative to the rest of the world because, again, I wish humanity were different, and I wish that we were not mean to each other, and I wish that we were better to each other. The reality is people are mean to each other, but it isn't necessarily because of your religion. People just want to find a reason to attack you. So the way I always put it is that I will gladly challenge anybody, Daniel or anyone else, to wear a Trump hat and walk through New York and then see what happens. Watch the hatred and the violence and the attacks that you're going to face for merely wearing a Trump hat. And I'll gladly have anybody else walk with a CNN hat or any kind of news organization hat, and we'll see who actually faces more hatred, more attacks. So in America, the violence, the political violence, is primarily coming from the far left. Those are the people who are attacking people simply for having political disagreements.
So, Daniel, coming on that particular point then, I mean...
It doesn't sound like you feel safe walking through Jackson Heights, Queens, or Brownsville, Brooklyn. It doesn't sound like you feel safe to visit New York. We feel bad for poor Mike Cernovich. But, Mike, you put forth a very grim, pessimistic view of humanity as though somehow hate were a natural thing. It's the very institutions of this country, from the school system through the mainstream media, through the demagogues in power who promote hate in the form of white supremacy, racism, segregation, xenophobia, homophobia, anti-women violence. If the people in this country who run this country had a true interest in stamping out all of this hatred, they could run things quite differently through the media. But divide and conquer tactics is how they can divide poor whites against immigrants, and they continually scapegoat. And this is where we disagree. The fundamental problem facing humanity that does not come from below. It comes from up on high. There's 5 individual billionaires in the world, the richest 5 individuals: Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, Carlos Slim in Mexico, a Spanish billionaire who's a real estate agent, and then the owners of Amazon who just purchased Whole Foods. Those 5 individuals by themselves possess more wealth than half of humanity. Until those super billionaires are usurped of this stolen wealth, there can be no dream.
Well, and on that note, gentlemen,
there can be no equality for the majority of people in the world.
Sorry, Mike, how do you respond?
Well, those are all liberals: Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Carlos Slim, who actually owns the New York Times, which is something nobody wants to talk about in America. We talk about foreign influence in the media and all this Russia conspiracy nonsense, but Carlos Slim is a Mexican monopolist. He actually makes a ton of money through the open borders culture. and then he owns the New York Times. He's the largest shareholder. He owns 18% of it. But nobody in America wants to address the foreign ownership of American media and why much of the news we have in America is fake. So again, we're kind of circling around. We often hear about from the left, oh, white supremacy this, white supremacy that. White people were the first people to end slavery. Slavery has existed in every culture, in every society. Slavery has always been around. It's existed in sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East. If the Europeans did it, the whites did it, everybody's done it. That doesn't excuse it. So I do have a grim view of the past of humanity. I think that we're improving. Steven Pinker is right. There are better angels coming out, and we are improving. But if you read a book like *Sapiens*, or you trace the history of the human experience, you're going to find slavery, rape, murder, death, destruction, othering people, treating people like they don't matter. The Hellenic did it, the Greeks did it, the Romans did it. Everybody, again, so all I hear about is white supremacy this, white supremacy that. But there are black supremacists, and there are people like Linda Sarsour, who talks about jihad against Trump supporters, and then she gets upset when we go, well, that's not really what jihad means. It's coming from both sides. It's coming from people of all cultures, races, and creeds. That's why people need to just sit down and be more civil and have more open discussions like we're having right now.
And on that optimistic note, we'll leave it. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining me. Daniel Shaw and Mike Cernovich, thank you for your time this evening. Thank you. More news is coming after this short break.